It should give you, yes, awesome. Great. So, Shameen and Hafsa, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today, and to tell us a little bit more about the role of Replenish Detroit in the water crisis and COVID crisis that we are seeing here in the city for a few months, and well, the water crisis goes even longer than that, as you guys know. So maybe we could begin by you telling us a little bit about Replenish Detroit. What is it, and what are you guys doing?
Sure. So Replenish Detroit is a campaign started by Wayne State University students. It was started around January of 2020. And so our mission is essentially to address public health issues that stem from social issues. One of the main ones being the water affordability crisis in Detroit, as well as the lack of access to hygiene items that stems from that issue. And so we started in January. We had done research on the topic. Originally, we were planning to work overseas in building water wells in Pakistan with a nonprofit organization. And then we had actually been talking to a few mentors, including Dr. Abdul Al-Sayed, who was a scholar in residence at Wayne State University in the fall semester, and he had recommended looking into the Detroit water crisis, since it is in the city where we study and where some of us work in, and it's so close to home, and there hasn't really been a student organization or group of students addressing this issue. And so we decided to pivot in January to a more local focus and focus on this issue that affects thousands of residents in Detroit since 2014 when it started.
Hafsa, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so we actually benefit a lot we notice we benefit a lot from being so close to Detroit and working so close. We've had donations shipped to our house that we donate to local food pantries, and we actually go ahead and drive those donations. And we really can't do that if we're still an international based organization. And so it's important to notice these issues close to our home, to where, like Shanmin said, where we work, where we study, because like as myself before January, I wasn't really aware that the Detroit water crisis existed, and a lot of other Wayne State University students don't know as well. So I think advocacy is one of the most important points of our organization as well.
Mm-hmm. So let's take turns maybe on this. So maybe Shanmin first, and then after that, Hafsa, you could tell me a little bit about your personal history about, with this organization and with this movement. How did you get involved in this to begin with?
Sure. So I'm going to be an incoming junior at Wayne State, and I had transferred to Wayne State University in the fall of 2019. And so myself and Mana, who is our Director of Internal Affairs for Replenish Detroit, we had decided to co-found a student organization called PANI, which was a nonprofit that we wanted to work with originally overseas in Pakistan. And so we had founded that in, I'd say, end of October 2019. And then we had sent out like an interview, board application to interview people to join our team. And that's how we met Hafsa and at the time, the 3 other board members. One of our board members has graduated since then. And so we formed a team of 6 students that were leading the student organization. And we were very much in the process of still building it up and recruiting students on campus, advocating for water issues globally that were happening overseas. And then we, like I mentioned before, in January, we had talked to a couple of mentors, including Dr. Abdullah Sayed. I know I talked to you as well, Dr. Rahul Mitra, after our diversity conference as well. And so that's when we learned about this issue. And the PANI nonprofit that I used to work with, so I worked with them from 2018 to 2019. They're very established, and they get a very steady amount of donations every month, and they have a whole system in place to build water wells. And so we felt like maybe our efforts could be better used elsewhere where a cause hasn't been addressed yet, like the Detroit water crisis. And like Hafsa said, advocacy is really key, and we felt we could do that if we are working on an issue that's in the city where we study in, and sort of be a place-based org, meaning we are working very closer within the place that we're trying to address the issue. And then we can also see the, I guess, fruits of our labor with our own eyes and make these community partnerships like we have with Pantry, like the Brightmoor Pantry, for example.
How about you, Hafsa?
So I actually didn't know Shanmin and Manna before, I believe it was January when they sent out board applications to Wayne State students, and I noticed that Bonnie was about Pakistani sanitation and hygiene issues, and my family's from Pakistan, so I thought it was very interesting to see an organization, and I firsthand hear stories and accounts from my family about these issues. So I thought that I would apply, and I applied for a director of finance because I have worked in similar positions in the past, so I thought it would be interesting to take on a similar role. And so from there I met Manna and Shanmin and Jasmine and Yasser. And so in January is when we sought to pivot from Pakistan issues to here in Detroit. And we were all on board with it, and after we really saw, I feel like we really saw our organization take off, because before then we were doing well. We advocated for sanitation and hygiene issues in Pakistan, and we had fundraisers, but after that we really were able to work with localized organizations and like the Brightmoor Food Connection Pantry, you, Dr. Rahul Mitra, and so we were able to really make connections here.
So, thank you. Well, so pani is it's an Urdu, Hindi, Bangladeshi word for water, of course, and it's interesting to me really that you guys are, you began really looking at this connection of, how water issues, how social justice issues stem from water scarcity, inequality issues in both Pakistan and Detroit and the USA in general. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about what you really see as some of the biggest problems in as far as water is concerned, water and social justice issues are concerned in both Pakistan and the U.S. or Michigan, and really how you see yourselves as maybe helping in this context.
Sure, so I could start with that. So to give an example that really stuck out to me is when I had worked with Pani from 2018 to 2019, one of the wells that I helped raise money for and that I helped, and that was built in, I believe it was the southern part of Pakistan called Sindh. So there we had built a well, and we had received anecdotes from the villagers who lived in that village, and how before the water well was built, they used to travel like a mile or so just to get water from a dirty gutter that was very unsanitary. It was clearly not a fresh source of water, and they would get their water from there, and that's what they would live off of. And then I remember reading an article in January about a woman in Detroit who had depended on, so she was a water shut-off victim. She could not afford her high water bill, and so she, due to non-payment, her water had been shut off, and she had depended on her gutter water as well. And what's crazy to think is that we live in America, which is a first world country compared to Pakistan, which is not. And when we think of lack of access to water, the first thing we think of is developing countries. But there is a huge water crisis issue here in America, Detroit being one of the cities that has seen the brunt of it for the past couple of years. So we know that this issue doesn't just affect Detroit, it affects many Americans, millions of Americans, 15 million Americans every year are said to not have access to clean drinking water, whether it be an issue of affordability, whether it be an issue of living in the Navajo Nation, and not having like water system in place. And so it's important not to overlook the fact that just because we live in a first world country, there are vast majorities of populations that don't have access to clean drinking water, and it's a very preventable issue. With the water affordability crisis in Detroit, Detroit sees residents paying 10% of their income on water annually versus the EPA that sets the standard for affordable water and sewage rates at 4.5% of income. So clearly they're paying double the amount, and that's just a very disproportionate ask.
So, a lot of universities get a lot of flack for not always necessarily being connected with their local communities, the communities around them. I think this is really something where students and faculty especially can do so much in terms of connecting, their work and their studies with really, the community around them in particular. Tell me a little bit about your process and your journey, because at the same time, when even though you might be a student organization with, the best of intentions to work and connect with your local communities, community groups, that's often much harder in practice, right? Than you think it would be when you first start down that path. So maybe tell us a little bit about your process and maybe what you've been learning along this journey as you start engaging some of the people around you in the local community groups. Because I know you mentioned Dr. Saeed, and of course we had conversations as well, but in lots of ways, we are not the community per se, right? And so maybe tell us a little bit about your process and trying to connect with the groups that you've been working with on the ground.
So I think,
sorry.
I think we realized that although we work and we study in Detroit, we are not residents of Detroit, and we are not personally being affected by these water shutoffs. So it's important to also acknowledge the needs of the community. So we work really closely with Reverend Roslyn of the Brightmoor Connection Food Pantry, to where we when we raise money or we receive grant money, that is where we try to donate hygiene and sanitation related items. So it's also difficult to gauge what the community needs, which is why when Reverend Roslyn says they need more Pine Sol or they need more diapers, we work and we order the shipments on like a 2-week basis. We don't make huge shipments at the beginning of the month or anything. We try to, every 2 weeks, we gauge the needs of the pantry so that they have their supplies that they need, and they're not, if they're running out of something, then you can add it to our next shipment.
Yep, and to add to Hafsa's comment, the reason why we have been delivering hygiene and sanitary items, of course, in light of COVID-19, but also there was a study done by the University of Michigan's School of Environment and Sustainability, and they had found that in a study of residents who have experienced water shutoffs, they were seeing high amounts of residents that have to make the difficult decision of choosing whether, am I going to pay my water bills this month, or am I going to pay for food, or am I going to pay for expensive children's diapers or hygiene items. And so we really admire the work of other local grassroots organizations like We the People of Detroit, like People's Water Board Coalition, who are on the ground delivering water, and we try to send our volunteers there as well. And so to sort of complement those efforts, we work with the Brightmoor Pantry to not just to provide these items that go along with protecting individuals from COVID-19 and their families as well. So, and trying to mitigate the economic difficulties of not being able to afford water, as well as COVID-19 that has exacerbated that issue as well.
So when COVID hit, it was such a, it wasn't necessarily huge. It wasn't necessarily a shock out of the blue, but I think the way it affected Detroit and Detroit residents was definitely unnerving, right? And of course, you were students at that time as well, and you had your classes as well. Maybe tell us a little bit individually, maybe what was going through your mind when suddenly you see this global pandemic happening here in Detroit. Were you surprised? Were you shocked? What was going through your head? Because prior to COVID, you were very much focused on water deliveries, and maybe how did you use that to sort of pivot again from water, but really thinking about this in terms of hygiene products and delivery. So maybe you could both take turns talking about how it affected you personally, and then how it affected your thinking about what you needed to do.
So personally, I lived on Wayne State campus, and although it was kind of a shift moving back home, I knew that I was privileged in the sense that I could come back home and I had a reliable internet, I had reliable housing, and a lot of people don't really get that same opportunity. So I think I was disappointed as any other college student was, but it wasn't a huge a shock, or like it wasn't all that bad for me. But I don't know if I was surprised, but it was really like heartbreaking to see what was going on in Detroit and seeing the events unfold in Detroit, because COVID kind of hit our nation as a surprise, but Detroit, it hit really hard. And being a public health major, I knew that there are a lot of public health issues in Detroit, so I couldn't say that I was all that surprised. So when we kind of, as an organization, water is linked so closely to sanitation and hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also the point where a lot of water groups, they have been advocating for returning the water, turning back on the water before, but this is when it really started to gain traction. And Governor Whitmer and Mayor Mike Duggan actually authorized turning back on the water, which was important, which was great, but it's important to realize that these issues were going on before too. Mm-hmm. And so, it was also a slow process.
Mm-hmm.
It's for a lot of Detroit residents, they still don't have water. Mm-hmm. And we're months into this. So the bureaucratic process is very long, it's very tedious, and we have to realize that real people get caught up in this.
Mm-hmm.
We actually had a speak-in that we wanted to do, and we had a plan for, I think, right at like the beginning of April, the end of March, and it just totally did not get to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we have certain events that we want to plan that we're thinking about doing after, maybe in the fall or whenever life starts to get back to normal. But right now we're trying to focus on just getting people the supplies that they need.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Shanmin? How did this the onset of COVID impact you personally, and then you're thinking about what Replenish Detroit had to do?
Sure. So I commute to Wayne State University, and so I remember when COVID-19 hit, I kind of anticipated it. We were looking at the news and seeing other colleges and universities across the nation close, and so it didn't come as a shock to me. Mm-hmm. But it was definitely a shift. And then it also did change kind of the trajectory that we had anticipated for Replenish Detroit. Like Hafsa said, we wanted to do a couple of events. And during the month of March, we had been collecting hygiene items on campus from students to donate to the Brightmoor Pantry. And I remember the day that the stay-at-home advisory started, that was the day Hafsa went down to deliver the items. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, that's amazing that she could go down there, but I was really scared for her, I remember. Mm-hmm. And so she'd successfully and safely delivered those 60 hygiene items that we had collected. And then I know at first we were a bit discouraged because we were going to do a second round of hygiene drive on campus to collect even more items. And then when COVID-19 hit, we were talking with Reverend Roslyn over the phone, and she was saying how she had to turn away visitors actually who came to the pantry looking for Pine Sol cleaner, looking for bleach, And the pantry just could not keep up with the high demand, especially at the beginning of COVID-19, which they weren't prepared for. And so we knew that we had to change our approach. And so that's when we decided to start a GoFundMe campaign in the beginning of April. And we had raised about $235 on the GoFundMe, and we used that to purchase bar soap and bleach for the pantry. Mm-hmm. And then we knew we had to continue to somehow find sources of funding. And so Hafsa and I applied for the Detroit Community Resilience Prize from the Desai Sethi Foundation. So we secured almost $5,000 from that. And then the Pollination Project was another grant organization we had received $500 for, and that's the money we've been using for the past, I'd say 3 months, delivering waves of hygiene and sanitary items to the Brightmoor Pantry. And so we're really glad that despite COVID-19 forcing us to be separated physically and having us working from home, we were able to change our approach and still be able to support the community in whatever ways that was possible.